Okay, the second method to solve for quadratics is by square roots. Now, this is a method you're probably not going to use very often. In fact, you're only going to use it if there is no b term. So if you're looking at the problem and you don't see like an x with a number, like 7x, you are not going to use square roots. So the only time you're going to use square roots, skipping ahead a little, is if you have an x squared or something else x squared and a number. They could be on the same side, they could be opposite, but there's no middle term. So this whole topic is about solving with square roots, but for whatever reason, you might see solve by inspection. So if you see this, it just means that you are going to solve using square roots. Okay, so solve using square roots or factoring, but most likely it's going to be with square roots. Okay, so first one says use inspection to find the solutions of the equation x squared equals 49. Well, most of you probably can just look at it and know that something by itself equals 49. So x times x is 49. Well, x must be 7. But we need to be careful. When we're solving with square roots, we got to remember there's actually a positive version of the answer and a negative version. Yes, 7 times 7 is 49, but negative 7 times negative 7 is also 49. So if we're going through this, a better way to do this, we would take our original and we need to take the square root of both sides. So if we end up with x equals, and then again, we have the positive version and the negative version. So I could have x is 7 or x is negative 7. So either of those work. Okay. If you want to simplify it a little, you could just end up saying x is equal to plus or minus 7. This plus or minus symbol means positive 7 or negative 7. So there are your two solutions for that. So if we look at the next one, it says to find the solutions of the equation x squared equals negative 121. So if I set it up, I go to take the square root, I end up with the square root of x squared, which is just x, but, I see a negative number inside this square root. We can't take the square root of a negative number, so what this ends up being, there's not an answer, there is no real solutions. Okay, so what this means is just if you were to graph this equation, it never crosses the x-axis. It's either always above it or always below. All right, so I want you to try practice 1 and 2 right now. Pause the video. Okay. So in practice 1, it says solve by inspection. We have x squared equals 169. So I just take the square root of both sides. I end up with x is equal to positive 13 or negative 13. So I'm just going to write plus or minus 13. Okay, practice 2. Again, I have x squared equals negative 36. So if I take the square root, again, I'm trying to take the square root of a negative number, and I cannot do that. So there is no real solution. Okay. All right, let's look at the next example. It says, find the solutions of the equation using square roots. And it gives you negative 3x squared equals negative 24. Now, at first glance, you see this negative 24, and you might think that you can't do it. There's no real solutions. right? Because this negative 36 up here, there was no solution. But we're not ready to take the square root yet because there's this negative 3 out front here. So once that x squared's by itself, if this is still negative, then we're going to have no real solution. So to get x by itself, I need to divide by negative 3. So I'd end up with x squared equals negative 24 divided by negative 3 is positive 8. Now that we have a positive number, it's okay to take the square root. So I can take the square root of both sides. I end up with x equals positive or negative square root of 8. Now, this is not a perfect square. So if you come across a number and it's not a perfect square, you can just leave it. So we end up with x equals positive square root of 8 or negative square root of 8. All right, go through and try practice 5 and 6, please. Pause the video. All right, for practice 5, we have 5x squared equals 125. So to get x by itself, first I would divide by 5. I end up with x squared equals 25. Take the square root of both sides. X is equal to 5, and it's positive or negative. Okay, for practice 6, if I divide by negative 4, I end up with x squared equals 9. Okay, remember a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Square root, I end up with x equals, this time it's a perfect square again, so the square root of 9 is 3, and it's positive or negative. So plus or minus 3. All right, last example. We now have a equation where we have 3x squared minus 5 equals 22. So we're going to have to solve this equation. We're going to have to get x squared by itself so we can take the square root. So first thing I would need to do, add 5 to both sides. I end up with 3x squared equals 27. Now I need to divide by 3 to both sides. X squared equals 9. Last, take the square root of both sides. And I end up with x equals, square root of 9 again is 3, and it's the positive or the negative version. Okay, so go through, try practice 5 and practice 6. Okay, for practice 5, it says to find the solutions of negative 5x squared plus 19 equals 144. So first step would be subtract 19 from both sides. I end up with negative 5x squared equals 125. Then if I divide by negative 5, I get x squared equals negative 25. Now, thinking about what we did before, we're at the point where x squared is by itself, and the number we're going to try to take the square root of is negative, which means we can't do it anymore. So this has no real solutions. Okay, and then for practice 6, find the solutions of negative 3x squared plus 26 equals 17. Subtract 26. I end up with negative 3x squared equals negative 9. Then if I divide by negative 3, I get x squared equals, well, now I have a negative divided by a negative, which makes this positive, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. So I have x squared equals 3. Last step, take the square root. I end up with x equals square root of 3. It's not a perfect square, so I can just leave it. And I have the positive version and the negative version. So positive square root of 3 or negative square root of 3.